And I'm going to talk about three things this morning. We could spend days here. There's so many things that we can pull out. I'm going to limit myself to three. Why is Jesus the good shepherd? What makes him good in this context? And the first one we read is that the good shepherd is recognized by his sheep. A stranger they will not follow, as opposed to the other ones, obviously, that we talked about. Now, this is kind of an odd statement again, because we talk about, well, a stranger they will not follow. What does that mean? How did they know who Jesus was? How did Jesus' sheep know who he was? Matthew 16, if you remember, Peter has just made the great confession. He says, "You are the Christ, Son of the living God." Jesus tells him, "Blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven." You weren't told this. You didn't figure this out because somebody came and told you, "Hey, by the way, Jesus is the Son of God." You didn't figure it out on your own, and you didn't use your intellectual abilities to decipher the codes and figure out that this is what was going on. You looked at what Jesus had done. You looked at who he was. You looked at what he said. And because you knew God, because you understood the Scriptures, because you were seeking God with all your heart, you looked at what Jesus was and you said, he's from God. And what he's saying has to be true. Now, we know that not everybody followed Jesus. And so it seems kind of odd that we say, a stranger they will not follow, because people were following the Pharisees, weren't they? Of course, why were they following? We found out about that in chapter 8 and chapter 9, didn't we? Why were people not speaking up against the Pharisees? Because the Pharisees had made it very clear that if you confess Jesus, we're going to cast you out of the synagogue. People were following not from their free will, but because the Pharisees were coercing them. They were forcing them. They were using their will and using their station and power. But as we see in the Scripture, not everyone was given to Jesus. He talks about the idea that all that have been given to me have heard my voice. And without getting into a lot of details of it, I try not to chase too many rabbits in this passage, because there's plenty of them. But if you look over at John chapter 17, in John chapter 17, Jesus explains exactly what he's talking about here, I think. John chapter 17, verses 6 through 8, we read, "I have manifested your name to the people whom you have given me out of the world." These are the people that hear his voice, that respond to the Messiah. What does he say? "I have manifested your name to the people who you gave me out of the world. Yours they were." They were already following you, first of all. "And you have given them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything that you have given me is from me. For I have given them the words that you gave me, and they have received them and have come to know in truth that I came from you, and they have believed that you sent me." This was not revealed miraculously. This wasn't some trick or some vision in the night that Peter had or all the other disciples had. This was simply them observing what they saw and understanding that because I have a relationship with God, because I am following God, I understand who God is, and I'm looking at Jesus and I see God. Isn't that what Jesus' mission was? We think about the standard of faith that Jesus required. We alluded to this the last time we talked about this. So let's go back just to review. If you remember, the whole argument that Jesus is making is, I have one witness that is me. The Pharisees would go to him and say, "Well, you have one witness. You witness for yourself. Your witness is not true." His point is, even if I do witness of myself, my witness is true. It doesn't matter. You need to believe me. Why? Because I can prove what I've seen? No. You need to believe me for who I am and for what I have done. When you think about what this, if you look at a court of law, you think about how we establish evidence. We basically do it in two ways, right? First of all, we have empirical proof. I can go to a crime scene and get data, and I can do DNA checks and fingerprints and all that kind of fun stuff, and I can prove conclusively that you did what I claim that you did. And no one can argue, well, you can argue against it, but I can show it. I can make you follow these conclusions and connect that what I am saying is true. Now, there's a second way that we do that, and that's we call witnesses. I call a witness to the stand, and the witness says, "I saw so-and-so do this on this and that day." Now, if he's the only witness, we can't prove that's true, can we? But what do? We establish him as a reliable witness. We know that this person is telling the truth, and this is why, because his character is upstanding, he has no motive or whatever it might be. And if I can establish that this person is believable, then I don't necessarily have to conclusively prove what he said. I'm going to believe what he said. That's the whole point of being a witness, isn't it? Do I believe what he says? And that's what Jesus is trying to establish here. He's saying, look, you're going to have to believe me in terms of what I'm telling you about the Father. Why? Because look at what I've done. Look at who I am, and look at how the works that I have done testify before me, testify about me and about who I am. And if you believe I'm sent from God, what do? Well, you listen to what he has to say. That's exactly what he asked of the blind man, in fact. He goes to him at the end of chapter 9 and asks him, who do you say the Son of Man is? This is the same question, essentially, that the Pharisees had asked him earlier. Remember what his response was? Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? I am convinced you have restored my sight. I am convinced that you are godly, you are from God. All things that you do are honorable, and therefore, whatever you tell me, that's what I'm going to believe. That's the kind of faith that Jesus has already set as the standard, and that's the kind of faith that convinced Peter that Jesus was the Christ. And that's the kind of faith I believe that he's talking about when he says, a stranger they will not follow. These people who are my sheep are placing their faith in me because they've seen my works, they know who I am, they know why I'm here, and they're going to trust that whatever I tell them is truth because it's from God. Why? Look at John chapter 14. And why do we believe these things? Why do we believe Jesus when he says these things? Why do his sheep follow him? John chapter 14, verses 7 through 11. Jesus is talking to the disciples here, and he says, this small print's just killing me. There it is. Verse 7, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for you. And Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show me the Father? Do you not believe that I am the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak of my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his work. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father in me, or else what? Believe on account of the works themselves. Things that I am doing establish my identity, and my identity is that of God. Remember in verse 18 of chapter 1, John starts this premise from the very beginning and works his way throughout the book. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten of the Father who dwelled in the heavens, he has declared him. He's telling you something that no one can ever know, that no one could ever find out on their own unless there is someone to testify on his behalf. John 12:44, Jesus cried out and said to them, whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me. We see this idea in Colossians 1:18 telling us that he is the image of the invisible God. And Hebrews 1 verse 3 says, he is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Now that word there, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, apogasma, or something like that. It's a Greek word, and it means basically effulgence or radiance or brightness. And the best way to describe that is if you go to if you're watching an eclipse and you're not looking right at it because you're not supposed to do that, but if you see the reflection on whatever device you're using and you see that corona effect, that's the radiance. That's what this word is talking about. When you look up at the bright sun, which again you're not supposed to do, but if you do, you're not going to see the sun, right? You don't actually see, unless it's very late and the light is dimmed somewhat, you're not going to see the ball of gas that is the sun, but what you are going to see is this bright radiance that's coming out of the sun. That's what he's talking about. Jesus is the visible aspect of God the Father. That's what he's trying to say here. And so when it says that the sheep recognize the shepherd, when they recognize Jesus for who they are, for who he is, it's because they recognize God. That is why he's the good shepherd. Second of all, the good shepherd truly cares for each sheep. What do we read? He calls them by name. He knows them specifically. And it even says that when he's brought all of them out, he goes on ahead. He doesn't just kind of tag along, and if anybody's left behind, that we're just they're just tough. He's going to wait till everybody's together. It's kind of like the teacher on the field trip. Is everybody off the bus? We all have our buddies here. Okay, now let's go. That's the image that we see here, and that's how a shepherd would know his sheep. It's pretty amazing. I can't even imagine what this. I haven't been around sheep a lot. I've been to enough county fairs and stock shows and all that stuff that I go up to, I don't know, one sheep, they look all the same to me. I don't, they might have a different color here and there, but I can't even imagine being able to distinguish sheep 1, sheep 2, sheep 3. What does Jesus say? The very hairs of your head are numbered. The fact that he knows us so well. And that's exactly what he's talking about. That same relationship of a shepherd to his sheep is Jesus to his flock. He has the knowledge and understanding that no one can know. Verse 15, he says, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, we'll have that relationship. Jesus came not only to save us, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, but the idea that I'm going to establish a relationship between you and the Father that is close, just as I and the Father am close. My desire, Jesus' desire, is to bring each one of you into that relationship. In John 14, when he talks about the idea that if anyone will do the will of my Father will love him, and we will come and make our abode with him. We're going to establish a relationship with you. We want to be close with you, and that is why Jesus is here. The idea of I'm going to bring my sheep together, I'm going to gather them together, and I'm going to create a fellowship between them and the Father. And he even says, other sheep, in verse 16, that do not belong to my flock, I must go. That are not of this flock, I should say. I must go and bring them that they may be one flock. Talking about the fact that there's the Gentiles out there that you've all disregarded, that nobody cares about at all, but I still see them. And I'm going to go bring them, and they're going to be part of this flock too. There's this great care that Jesus has, and it's not dependent on the value of the sheep. When we think about, there's the old line from Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. The idea that, well, there's my prize bull over here, and then there's Jethro over here, and, well, he is what he is, and that's fine. He's the guy that if somebody wants to, I'm going to show up the herd, I'll kind of herd him over in the back, and we'll just keep him out of the way. But this is the guy. This is the one right here that I want people to see. Is that how it works? Does Jesus look out at the flock and say, okay, that's the one that I can use. He's valuable. He's good. He's very charismatic. He's got to get, well, those guys in the back, I'm not really that worried about them. I don't know that they're really going to help me that much. Jesus cares for all of them. It's not based on what they can do for him. It's not based on how qualified they are in this way or that way or the other way. It's not how weak they are, how strong they are, whatever it is. Jesus cares for every single one of them. And all of them are called into his flock. And how much does he care? Well, he says that in verse 11 through 12, doesn't he? Verse 11 through 12, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. That's why I moved my bookmark. I got to get back over to John chapter 10. Notice that word that's used there. It's kind of interesting. The word for life there is different. It's the word is pronounced psyche. And of course, we all know what that means. It is a word. He's been using just the word life. I believe it was Zeo or Zoe. I forget which it is. That's just the idea of existence. It's animation or whatever it might be. The idea of psyche is also translated as breath. It is translated as heart. It is translated as mind. It is translated as soul. In fact, usually it's translated soul in most. This isn't just a question. It talks about the idea that the shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Now, first of all, let's just ask this question. Would even a good shepherd do that? When we think about shepherds, this is something that hung me up for a long time when I read this. The hireling flees. Well, okay, yeah, the hireling I can see. He doesn't care. The wolf comes, the hireling's not going to come. But would a good shepherd really give his life for a sheep? No, not intentionally. Now, I guess you could probably argue that if a shepherd, like, for example, someone like David, who's guarding the flock and the lion comes and these are my sheep and I'm going to take care of them, he doesn't go into that thinking, if I have to die in defense of these sheep, that's what I'm going to do. That's not the point of any of that. If he dies, it's purely by accident. That is not the intent. And there's nobody, I think, that would argue that there's any shepherd out there that's worth anything at all that is willing to die for his sheep, and that is exactly what Jesus does. Romans 5:7. What does it say? For no man for no man would die for a good man, although peradventure even for a righteous man some might even dare to die. Maybe for a righteous man you might do it. But what did he say? God commended his love in that while we were all yet sinners, Christ died for us. He showed his love and care. And we think about this idea. Let's go back to that word soul, that word life. Just imagine, if you're walking down the road one day, and you see a hijack going on. You run in there to help, and there's a guy, he's pulled a gun on somebody, and he's about to shoot them. And you valiantly jump in the way and take that bullet, and you give your life for that person. There's a sense in which we would say you gave your life. But there's a real sense in which that's not really what Jesus is talking about here. Because when we talk about, there's one thing to sacrifice myself. It is another thing to give my life for something. What that means is that every day of my life, from the very beginning to the very end, my focus has been on saving you. That's the image we see here. Jesus, it talks about in Philippians 2 that Jesus emptied himself and took on himself the form of a servant. Just imagine that. From the time that Jesus came to this earth, I don't understand how all that worked when he was a child and when he was a baby. At what point Jesus understood all that, we're not told. But just imagine that Jesus, throughout his adult life, everything that he did was pointing him towards that one moment when he was going to give his life for you and me. That is what it's talking about here. I lay down my life for the sheep. Everything that I do, I'm standing here talking to you. I'm debating, I'm discussing, I'm imploring, I'm pleading with you. All of these things are being done for you.